Captain Jake Morrison had exactly 3 rules for running cargo through the Outer Rim. First, never trust a client who pays in advance without haggling. Second, if the job sounds too easy, it probably involves either pirates or lawyers, and honestly he'd rather deal with the pirates. Third, and most importantly, never, ever agree to quote-unquote simple milk runs to uninhabited planets, because the universe has a twisted sense of humor and uninhabited never actually means uninhabited. So naturally, here he was, standing on the bridge of the cargo hauler Wanderer, staring at 3 of the most pathetically adorable alien creatures he'd ever seen, wondering exactly when his life had turned into a nature documentary gone wrong. "Okay, so let me get this straight," Jake said, rubbing his temples where a headache was rapidly forming. "We dropped down to pick up some routine geological samples from a planet that's supposed to be as empty as my bank account, and instead, we find what looks like a daycare center for tiny alien murder machines." His pilot, Tony Reeves, was crouched down next to the creatures, making those ridiculous cooing noises that grown men only make when they think nobody's watching. The 3 cubs, if that's what they were, looked like someone had crossed a tiger with a dragon and then shrunk the result down to the size of house cats. They had scales that shifted between deep purple and silver, 6 legs each, and eyes that were far too intelligent for Jake's comfort level. "They're not murder machines, Cap," Tony said without looking up. "Look at those little faces. They're just babies. Babies with claws that could probably slice through our hull," pointed out Maya Rodriguez, their engineer, though she was also eyeing the creatures with obvious interest. "And did anyone else notice they've got what looks like natural armor plating?" The largest of the 3 cubs made a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a growl, then waddled over to Jake on unsteady legs. It looked up at him with those unsettlingly bright golden eyes and made another noise that sounded almost like a question. "Oh, come on," Jake muttered. "Don't look at me like that. I'm not your dad. I'm a freight hauler who's apparently having the worst luck in the galaxy." Dr. Emma Cross, their xenobiologist and the only one who'd had the sense to run a scanner over the creatures instead of immediately adopting them, looked up from her readings with a frown. "Jake, you need to see this. These readings are unusual." "Unusual how? Unusual like they're carrying some plague that'll kill us all? Or unusual like they're actually tiny alien robots designed to steal our cargo?" "Unusual like they appear to be completely healthy, well-fed, and, according to my scans, were left here very recently, as in, within the last few hours recently." The implications of that hit Jake like a meteor to the brain. "So what you're telling me is that someone dropped off 3 alien babies on a supposedly uninhabited planet right before we happened to show up for a routine pickup that was definitely not routine." "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Jake stared down at the cubs, who had now arranged themselves in a small circle around his boots and were making synchronized chirping noises. The universe, he decided, was definitely trying to tell him something. He just wasn't sure he wanted to hear it. "Vero, run a full species analysis on our new passengers," Jake called out to the ship's AI, trying to ignore the way the smallest cub had somehow managed to climb onto his boot and was now purring like a tiny engine. "Certainly, Captain," came Vera's crisp British accent from the speakers. "Though I should point out that referring to potentially dangerous alien life forms as passengers might be somewhat optimistic. Just run the scan, Vera." The AI hummed thoughtfully as holographic scanning beams played over the cubs. "Fascinating. According to my databases, these appear to be juvenile Krillians, specifically Krillian predator class, subspecies Apex." Maya whistled low. "Krillians? As in the species that makes Klingons look like pacifist yoga instructors?" "The very same," Vera confirmed with what Jake could swear was smugness. "Adult Krillians are apex predators, capable of hunting in pack formation across multiple star systems. They're known for their strategic intelligence, natural weaponry, and a social structure based entirely on tests of worthiness and strength." Tony, who was now sitting cross-legged on the deck with 2 of the cubs crawling all over him, looked up with a grin. "Well, these little guys don't seem very apex predatory to me." "That's because they're babies, you walking disaster magnet," Jake said. "The question is, what are baby Krillians doing on a planet that our client specifically told us was uninhabited? And why do I have the sinking feeling that this is about to become my problem?" Dr. Cross was studying her scanner readings with increasing concern. "Jake, there's something else. The scans show traces of adult Krillian biosignatures all around the landing site. Multiple adults. They were here, they left the cubs, and then they deliberately departed." "So we're dealing with alien deadbeat parents?" "More likely we're dealing with some kind of cultural practice," Cross continued. "Many predator species have ritual tests or trials involving their young. This could be some sort of coming-of-age ceremony. The largest cub, apparently bored with Jake's boot, had wandered over to the cargo bay's control panel and was eyeing the buttons with obvious interest, its small claws extended and retracted experimentally. "Oh no you don't," Jake said, scooping up the cub before it could reprogram their life support systems. The creature looked up at him and made a sound that was definitely laughter. "Great. We've got a comedian." "Captain," Vera interrupted, "I'm detecting something unusual in the cub's behavioral patterns. They appear to be studying us." "Studying us? How?" "Observing our reactions, testing our responses to their actions, cataloging our individual behavioral traits. If I didn't know better, I'd say they were conducting their own analysis of our species." Maya snorted. "So we're not just babysitting alien cubs, we're being psychoanalyzed by alien cubs." The middle cub, apparently deciding that Tony needed more attention, had begun a complex maneuver involving climbing up his shirt and positioning itself on his shoulder like some kind of scaly parrot. Tony, for his part, seemed absolutely delighted by this development. "You know what the really disturbing part is?" Jake said, watching as the smallest cub tried to figure out how to open Emma's medical kit. "They're actually kinda cute. And I never thought I'd say that about something with retractable claws and armor plating." "Stockholm Syndrome," Maya suggested helpfully. "You're bonding with your captors." "They're not my captors. They're... Jake trailed off as the largest cub successfully opened the medical kit and began carefully examining each instrument with obvious intelligence. "Okay, fine. They might be my captors." 2 hours later, Jake was seriously considering a career change. Maybe something safe and predictable like bomb disposal or professional wrestling. The cubs had somehow managed to reorganize his entire cargo bay according to what appeared to be some kind of alien feng shui. Tony had started teaching them basic human words, and Maya was explaining the finer points of engine maintenance to creatures that probably understood more than they were letting on. "Captain," Vera's voice cut through his existential crisis, "I'm detecting multiple large vessels approaching our position at sublight speed." Jake felt his stomach drop somewhere in the vicinity of his boots. "Define large." "Krillian battlecruisers, 7 of them. Estimated arrival time, 43 minutes. The cargo bay went dead silent except for the soft chirping of the cubs, who had apparently decided that now was the perfect time to practice their harmonies. "Well," Jake said, his voice coming out slightly higher than usual, "that's just fantastic, absolutely perfect. We kidnapped the alien equivalent of royal babies, and now the entire extended family is coming to collect them, with enough firepower to turn us into cosmic dust." Dr. Cross was frantically checking her readings. "Jake, wait. If this was just about retrieving the cubs, they would have sent a single ship. 7 battlecruisers suggests something much bigger." "Bigger how? Like execution-style bigger? Or total annihilation of our species bigger?" "I'm thinking more like formal first contact bigger." Tony looked up from where he was building some kind of fort out of cargo containers for the cubs. "So we're either about to die horribly, or we're about to become the most famous humans in the galaxy. With our luck, probably both." The largest cub suddenly stood up on its hind legs and made a series of complex sounds that definitely weren't random chirping. The other 2 cubs immediately stopped what they were doing and formed up beside it in what looked suspiciously like a military formation. "Did they just organize themselves?" Maya asked. "Vera, please tell me you got that recorded." "Of course, Captain, and I believe Dr. Cross is correct. This appears to be a formal evaluation scenario. The cubs were placed here deliberately, we responded in a specific way, and now the results of our behavior are being assessed." Jake stared at the 3 cubs, who were now sitting in perfect formation, looking back at him with those intelligent golden eyes. "So, what you're telling me is that this whole thing was a test that we didn't even know we were taking." "A test that most species apparently fail," Cross added grimly. "Think about it. How many species would have just left 3 abandoned alien babies on a planet? How many would have tried to sell them? How many would have seen them as a threat and—" Okay, I get it," Jake interrupted. "We accidentally passed some kind of cosmic final exam by not being complete monsters." The smallest cub made a sound that was definitely approval and waddled over to pat Jake's leg with one tiny paw. Jake looked down at it and sighed. "You know what the worst part about all this is?" he said. "I actually like you little troublemakers, and now I have to explain to a fleet of alien battleships why I've been teaching their children how to play poker." "You taught them poker?" Maya demanded. "They're really good at it. I think they've been counting cards." 37 minutes later, Jake stood in the Wanderer's cramped airlock. trying to look like a respectable representative of humanity while 3 alien cubs sat at his feet like the world's most dangerous honor guard. Through the viewport, he could see the Krillean flagship, and frankly, calling it impressive was like calling a supernova mildly warm. The thing was the size of a small city, all flowing curves and predatory angles, with hull plating that seemed to shift and ripple like living skin. Weapon ports dotted its surface like eyes, and Jake was pretty sure he could see smaller ships moving around it like fish around a shark. "Remember," he muttered to his crew, "we're friendly, cooperative, and definitely not the kind of people who accidentally kidnap alien royalty." "Technically," Tony pointed out, "we didn't kidnap them, they were abandoned. I don't think their parents are going to see it that way." The airlock hissed open and Jake got his first look at an adult Krillian. If the cubs were house cats, this thing was a saber-toothed tiger that had been hitting the gym for about 1,000 years. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, with the same shifting purple-silver scales as the cubs, but arranged in patterns that suggested both armor and artistry. 6 powerful legs supported a body that was pure predatory grace, and when it moved, Jake could see the casual power in every step. But it was the eyes that really got his attention. Those same golden eyes as the cubs, but ancient, intelligent, and currently studying him with the intensity of someone deciding whether he was worth talking to or just worth eating. "I am Alpha Prime Thok Resh," the creature said, in perfect, if slightly accented, English. "Pack leader of the 7th Fleet, guardian of the outer reaches, and father to the cubs you have cared for." Jake tried to swallow, but discovered his mouth had gone completely dry. "Captain Jake Morrison of the cargo vessel Wanderer, and a temporary babysitter, apparently." Behind Thakrish, 2 more Krillians emerged from what Jake now realized was some kind of transport tube that had sealed itself to their airlock. These were smaller, but no less intimidating, and they moved with the coordinated precision of a military unit. "Pack leader," one of them said in a voice like gravel being processed through a wood chipper, "the cubs appear unharmed and content." "More than content," the other added, sounding almost puzzled. "They have bonded with the humans." Thakarish's attention shifted to the cubs, who had arranged themselves between Jake and their father in what was definitely a protective formation. The largest cub made a series of complex sounds, clearly communicating something important. "Interesting," Takish rumbled. "My son tells me you taught him about human games of chance and strategy." "Well, yes, but it was more like... And that you shared your food with them despite not knowing if it would be compatible with their biology?" Jake glanced back at Dr. Cross, who nodded encouragingly. "Emma made sure it was safe first. And that when they were frightened by the sound of your engines starting, you changed your departure schedule to allow them time to adjust. That was just common sense. They were clearly scared, and..." Jake stopped mid-sentence as he realized what was happening. "This is still part of the test, isn't it?" For the first time since entering the ship, Thakrish's expression changed. The predatory intensity softened into something that might have been amusement. "Very perceptive, Captain Morrison. Yes, this is still part of the test. The first phase was observing how you would treat our young when you believed them to be abandoned and helpless. The second phase is observing how you conduct yourself when faced with the consequences of your choices. And how am I doing so far? You have not attempted to use our cubs as bargaining chips. You have not tried to hide behind them or push them toward us to save yourself. You have positioned yourself between our young and perceived danger, despite the fact that we are their family and you are a stranger." The middle cub had apparently decided that the conversation was taking too long and had begun climbing up Jake's leg, with obvious intent to reach his shoulder. Jake automatically steadied the little creature with one hand while trying to maintain some semblance of diplomatic dignity. "Most species," Thatesh continued, watching this interaction with obvious interest, "respond to our arrival with fear, aggression, or attempts at negotiation. Very few show concern for our cub's emotional well-being during the transition." "Well," Jake said as the smallest cub decided to join its sibling and began its own ascent, "they've kind of grown on us, like tiny, scaly, surprisingly intelligent parasites." One of the other Krillians made a sound that Jake was pretty sure was laughter. Thakriesh's eyes glittered with what was definitely amusement. "Captain Morrison," the Alpha Prime said formally, "on behalf of the Krillin hegemony, I extend an invitation to formal diplomatic relations between our species. Your people have passed a test that has been failed by 17 other civilizations over the past century." Jake blinked. "Wait, what happened to the other 17? Let us just say that species who would harm or exploit helpless young are not the kind of neighbors we wish to have." Looking around at the massive ship, the armed escorts, and the casual mention of 17 civilizations that had apparently failed this test, Jake suddenly understood exactly how high the stakes had been. So, he said carefully, when you say failed, complete economic sanctions, isolation from galactic civilization, and in 3 cases where they actually harmed the Cubs, total annihilation of their military capabilities. Thakrar paused. Your species, however, appears to have strong protective instincts toward young of any species. This is rare. Jake was still processing the casual mention of annihilated civilizations when Thakrar did something completely unexpected. The massive alien predator lowered himself down onto his belly, bringing his enormous head closer to Jake's eye level, and spoke in a tone that was almost gentle. Captain Morrison, what I am about to propose has never been offered to any species before. The Krillian hegemony would like to establish a formal alliance with humanity, based not on military might or economic advantage, but on your species' demonstrated capacity for nurturing. I'm sorry, what? Jake said, pretty sure he'd misheard. Did you just say nurturing? Indeed. In all our centuries of expansion across the galaxy, we have encountered countless species, warriors, traders, scientists, philosophers. But never have we found a species that would treat unknown young with such instinctive care. Thakresh's golden eyes fixed on Jake with unsettling intensity. Do you understand what this means to a species like ours? Jake looked down at the cubs, who had now completely taken over his shoulders and were purring contentedly. Honestly? Not really. I mean, we just did what seemed right. Precisely. One of Thakresh's escort guards stepped forward. I am War Prime Veltar. I have led campaigns across 40 star systems. I have conquered worlds and broken enemy fleets. But I cannot do what you did in these past hours. Which was make our cubs laugh, Veltar said simply. Make them feel safe with strangers. Make them trust completely and without reservation. Tony, who had been unusually quiet during the whole diplomatic encounter, suddenly spoke up. So what exactly are you proposing? Because Jake's great with kids, but I'm not sure he's ready to become the galaxy's babysitter. Thakrar made that sound that might have been laughter again. Not babysitting, young pilot. Partnership. The Krillian hegemony controls 73 star systems and maintains the largest military force in this sector of the galaxy. We are, as your Dr. Cross mentioned, the apex predators of civilized space. Okay, Maya said slowly. And we are terrible parents. The silence that followed this statement was so complete that Jake could hear the ship's air recyclers humming. I'm sorry, Dr. Cross said carefully. Did you just admit that an entire galactic empire is bad at parenting? It's not bad, Thakrar corrected. Incomplete. We can teach our young to hunt, to fight, to strategize and conquer, but we struggle with the softer skills. Empathy, patience, the ability to comfort without dominating. He gestured with one clawed appendage toward his cubs. In 4 hours with your crew, my offspring have learned more about cooperation and play than they would in 4 months with our traditional rearing practices. The largest cub chose that moment to slide down Jake's arm and begin showing off some kind of complex acrobatic routine it had apparently learned from watching Tony earlier. The other 2 immediately joined in, turning Jake's personal space into an impromptu performance arena. We have never done this before, Veltar observed, with what Jake was beginning to recognize as Krilli amazement. Young Krillians do not play, they train. Well, yeah, Jake said, automatically steadying one of the cubs as it attempted a particularly ambitious flip. They're kids. Kids are supposed to play. This is exactly what we mean, Thakrar said. Your species understands something that we have forgotten, if we ever knew it at all, the value of joy in development. Emma had been quiet throughout most of the exchange, but now she stepped forward with her scanner still in hand. From a xenobiological perspective, this actually makes sense. Krillians evolved as apex predators. Your entire social structure is built around hierarchy, strength, and survival. But humans evolved as cooperative breeders. We're naturally inclined to nurture young that aren't even our own species. Cooperative breeders? Jake asked. It means human children are raised not just by their parents, but by extended family, friends, even strangers in the community. It's one of the defining characteristics of our species. We literally can't help but take care of babies. Even babies with claws and armor plating, apparently, Tony added, grinning as one of the cubs successfully performed what looked like a tiny backflip. Thakrar rose back to his full height, which Jake was trying not to find intimidating. Captain Morrison, The Krillian hegemony formally proposes a cultural exchange program. We would provide your species with advanced technology, military protection, and access to galactic civilization. In return, you would help us learn to raise our young with the balance of strength and compassion that your species demonstrates naturally. Jake looked around at his crew. Maya was nodding thoughtfully, Emma looked fascinated from a scientific perspective, and Tony was making faces at the cubs and getting delighted chirps in response. So let me get this straight, Jake said. You want to trade us starships and laser guns for parenting advice. Drastically oversimplified but essentially correct. And if we say no, then we return to our territories. You continue with your cargo runs, and both our species miss an unprecedented opportunity for mutual growth. Thakresh paused, though I suspect my cubs will be quite disappointed. As if on cue, all three cubs looked up at Jake with those enormous golden eyes and made synchronized sounds that were unmistakably pleading. Ooh, come on, Jake muttered. That's not fair. You're using the cute factor against me. We prefer to call it strategic emotional leverage, Vaeltar said, and Jake was pretty sure the War Prime was developing a sense of humor. The smallest cub had somehow managed to curl up in the crook of Jake's arm and was making soft contentment sounds. Looking down at the tiny creature, Jake realized that somewhere in the past few hours, these little troublemakers had gone from alien complications to something that felt almost like family. All right, he said finally, but I have conditions. Name them. First, no more surprise tests. If you want to evaluate humanity, you ask us directly. Agreed. Second, the cubs get to stay with us until they're old enough to choose for themselves where they want to be. Thakresh exchanged looks with his guards. This is highly irregular, but acceptable. And third, Jake said, grinning as an idea struck him, I want it in writing that I'm now officially the galaxy's first professional alien babysitter. Because honestly, after today, that's going on my resume. 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the brand new human Krillian Cultural Center orbiting Earth, watching a dozen human children play with an equal number of Krillian cubs in what had to be the most adorable and terrifying playground in the galaxy. The human kids were teaching the cubs how to play tag, while the cubs were showing the humans advanced climbing techniques that would probably give their parents heart attacks. You know, he said to Thakresh, who had become an unexpectedly frequent visitor, when I woke up that morning, I was planning to haul some rock samples and maybe stop for a decent meal somewhere. I definitely wasn't planning to become the galaxy's most reluctant diplomat. Fate rarely consults our schedules, Captain Morrison, Thakresh replied, though Jake was pretty sure there was amusement in the alien's tone. Besides, you have adapted admirably to your new role as Cultural Exchange Coordinator. Is that what we're calling it? Because the press keeps using that Cube Whisperer nickname, and honestly it's starting to stick. Jake watched as one of the original cubs, now significantly larger and sporting the beginnings of adult armor plating, carefully helped a human toddler reach the top of a climbing structure. The cub, who had earned the human name Trouble for obvious reasons, had grown into a magnificent young predator, but still purred like a kitten whenever Jake scratched behind his ear ridges. The integration has exceeded all projections, Dr. Cross said, joining them at the viewport. She now held the official title of Director of Interspecies Developmental Psychology, which basically meant she got to study alien child development and publish papers that made her the most famous xenobiologist in human space. The cubs raised with human influence show increased empathy, creativity, and cooperative behavior, while maintaining all their natural predatory advantages. And the human children? Jake asked, though he could see the answer playing out in front of him. Increased confidence, improved strategic thinking, and what our child psychologists are calling enhanced survival awareness. Apparently, playing with baby apex predators has some interesting developmental benefits. Tony's voice crackled over the intercom from the flight deck of their new ship, the Wanderer 2, which was definitely not a cargo hauler anymore. Hey Jake, we've got another pickup request. 3 Vroxian diplomatic pods on Kepler 4412. They're requesting specifically the Cub Whisperer for first contact protocols. Jake sighed. In the past 6 months, he'd somehow become the go-to human for any first contact situation involving young aliens. Word had spread through the galactic community that there was a human ship that specialized in culturally sensitive juvenile alien relations, and apparently that was a service in high demand. Vraxians, he called back. What do we know about them? Silicon-based, highly intelligent, reproduced by crystalline budding, Vera's voice joined the conversation. The AI had been upgraded with Krillian technology and was now sarcastic in 17 different languages. Their young are apparently some kind of living geometric puzzle that requires constant mental stimulation to develop properly. So we're going from babysitting alien tigers to babysitting alien Rubik's Cubes. Pleased to be an accurate assessment, Captain, Vera replied cheerfully. Maya's voice came through from the engine room. New hyperdrive is ready for testing. Thanks to our Krillin upgrades, we can make the trip in 3 days instead of 3 weeks. Jake looked out at the playground again, where Trouble had organized all the children, human and Krillin alike, into some kind of elaborate game that seemed to involve elements of capture the flag, 3-dimensional chess, and professional wrestling. Whatever they were playing, everyone was laughing, which Jake had learned was the universal sound of childhood joy. You realize, he said to Takarish, that 6 months ago, I was a completely unremarkable cargo pilot, with a ship held together by duct tape and hope. Now I'm apparently some kind of galactic child development specialist, with a crew of xenobiologists, and a ship that's more advanced than most military vessels. And how do you feel about this transformation? Jake considered the question seriously. His bank account was healthier than it had ever been, thanks to the Krillin Alliance's generous compensation packages. His ship was a marvel of technology that made their old cargo hauler look like a bicycle. He was famous across human space and becoming known throughout the galactic community as the human who could talk to alien children. But more importantly, he'd helped forge an alliance that had already prevented 2 potential wars and opened up possibilities for cooperation that nobody had imagined before. Human engineers were working with Krillin strategists to design better ships. Krillin warriors were learning patience and empathy from human teachers. And somewhere in the galaxy, there were 17 fewer species that might have been wiped out because they failed a test they didn't even know they were taking. Honestly, Jake said finally, I think I'm okay with it. Besides, somebody's got to make sure the galaxy's children get proper playtime. Trouble had apparently decided that the game needed more complexity and was now explaining something to the other children using a combination of chirps, gestures, and what appeared to be tactical diagrams drawn in the sandbox. The human kids were nodding seriously and asking questions that Trouble answered with the patience of a natural teacher. Captain Morrison, Thutresh said formally, on behalf of the Krillin hegemony and the growing Galactic Cooperative Alliance, I want you to know that your simple act of kindness toward 3 lost cubs has already changed the political landscape of this entire sector of space. Yeah, well, Jake said, grinning as he watched the children play. Turns out the universe just needed better babysitters. From the playground, Trouble looked up and made the sound that Jake had learned meant, come play with us. The other original cubs, now nearly adult-sized but still incorrigibly playful, added their own calls to the invitation. Jake looked at Takresh, who gestured toward the playground with obvious amusement. Your students are calling, Cultural Exchange Coordinator. Right, Jake said, heading for the door. Duty calls, and honestly, after everything that's happened, I can't think of anywhere I'd rather be. As he walked toward the playground, Jake reflected on the cosmic joke that had turned a simple cargo run into the foundation of interspecies cooperation. Sometimes the most important moments in history started with the simplest decisions. Sometimes, saving the galaxy was just a matter of being kind to someone who needed help. And sometimes, Jake thought, as Trouble launched himself into Jake's arms with a joyful purr, the best diplomatic solutions involved a lot more hugging than anyone expected.